Hi there, I'm High Def and I would like to welcome you to lesson 1 of the over-the-shoulder progressive house production course. In this video we are going to be focusing on creating the loop. We're going to do all sorts of things like adding chord progression, we're going to be adding a bass line, we're going to work on melodies, and we're going to do basic drums. Okay, so I hope you learn a lot from this video. Please go ahead and click the like button and subscribe to the channel. Please go ahead and follow along in your own DAW and create something as you see me apply different techniques so that you can get the practice in and actually sharpen up your skill with production. Let's get into it. Okay, so it's time for me to start the actual process of making the song. So I'm going to start off with the actual chord progression. And what you will notice is that I've set the actual grid resolution to 16th notes. And the idea is we're going to have an 8th note for each note of the chord. And then we're going to have a little space before we hit the next note. So that little space that we have between the different notes is going to be a 16th note space. So why do I start with chords? Well, chords are pretty useful in the sense that they have multiple notes playing at the same time, and they form a nice foundation for a song, for melodies, for bass lines, for all of these other things that you want to add to your song. So a chord progression is usually a very good place to start with your actual song. So I would suggest that you do the same thing. As I said, go and open up your DAW and start using these techniques as you see me doing it in the actual process. So one thing to note in the chord progression is that I try to actually make the notes of the chord progression work well with the other chords. So if I have a certain chord and I move over to another chord, I always am listening to how the different chords move from the one to the next, and I'm trying to make them sound nice together. And one of the big ways we do that is we actually take the notes that we have in each chord and we move them up or down by 1 octave. In other words, if one of the notes is an E, then I might move that note up 1 octave, or I might move that note down 1 octave. And in this way you can often get a chord progression that sounds smoother, where the chords don't sound detached from each other. You want the chords to sound like they belong to one family, like they belong to one group. And one of the best ways to do that is to make sure that the different chords actually have notes in common with each other. So you might have a chord that has an E at the top, and you might have another chord that has an E at the bottom. So you want to move one of those E's so that they are in line with each other, so that either both of them are at the top or both of them are at the bottom. In this way, the chords have notes in common, which makes the chord progression itself sound smoother. Okay, so that is something to just keep in mind. The other thing that you will notice is I'm using a tempo of 128 BPM. Okay, that's a pretty standard tempo for progressive house. And you will notice that each of the chords actually last for 2 bars. Although I'm playing the chord multiple times, because remember I'm using 16th notes for my grid, each of the chords actually plays for 2 bars. And that means if I'm going to make a chord progression with 4 chords in it, the actual chord progression is going to be 8 bars long. Okay, so that's going to be the basic length of the loop. It's going to be an 8-bar loop. So that's also something just to keep in mind. Make the loop an 8-bar loop instead of a 4-bar loop, and then make each chord 2 bars long. Okay, now in terms of rhythms, you can play around with a rhythm and come up with your own rhythm if you feel like it, but I would suggest that you start off with a basic rhythm like the one that I'm using, and then once you have that basic rhythm, you can always go back in and you can edit the rhythm until it feels the way that you want it to feel. Okay, just remember that groove and bounce is very important. You don't want something that's going to confuse the listener, so something that is quite constant, that doesn't have a lot of changes in it, that repeats a lot, is better than something that is changing the whole time. So if you're using a certain rhythm for the first chord, you generally want to use that exact same rhythm for the second chord and the third chord and the fourth chord. So that is just something to keep in mind if you're going to use a different rhythm from what you see me using. Okay, so that's it for now. Let's get into actually making this chord progression. Okay, so now that I have the chord progression, what I want to do is I want to add the bass line. And generally what you want to do with bass lines is you want to take the root notes of your actual chords and you want to use that as your bass line. Something to keep in mind when you're adding a bass line is that you don't want your bass line to interfere with your kick drum. Remember that your bass line and your kick drum are both occupying the same space in the frequency range. They are both playing low frequencies mostly. So what you want to do is you want to have space for the kick drum and you want to have space for the bass line. Now the way to do this is to actually take note of where the kick drum plays. So the kick drum will play on the 1, 2, 3 and 4 of every single bar, and what you want to do is make sure that you don't place your bass line notes on the 1, 2, 3 and 4. Okay, in general that is what's going to work. So you place your bass notes in between the kick notes. Okay, so the kick plays and then the bass line note plays, and then the kick plays again and then a bass line note plays. That's something to just keep in mind as you are programming your bass line. Also try to go for shorter notes and not these long drawn out notes that create slower types of rhythms. Go for shorter notes that creates nice grooves in the bass line. Take note of the rhythm that I'm using for the bass line. You don't need to copy that rhythm, but notice how the rhythm repeats the whole time to create something that is quite hypnotic and that creates a groove. Okay, something that you can bob your head to as you are listening to the loop. Keep that in mind throughout your own production process as well. Okay, that's it for now. Let's get into it. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to add a melody to the actual loop that we have so far, which is just a chord progression and a bass line. And I want to add a melody just to start getting a different vibe going in the actual song, and just to have something to actually whistle and to also see what direction I can go in with the actual song. With progressive house, things that are set in stone would generally be things like your kick drum, things like your clap, and different kinds of hi-hat patterns. These things are generally set in stone. You already know where the kick drum is going to play, you already know where the clap is going to play. And as I said, certain type of hi-hat patterns, you already know the actual rhythm that you're going to use for the hi-hat pattern. So why do I mention that? I mention that because what you will find is in the creative process, you don't need to actually focus on those things that are kind of set in stone. You can add those things if you want, but they don't need to take up any of your creative energy. So you can spend your creative energy while you are in that beginning phase on things like melodies, things like bass lines, things like the chord progressions, because you generally know what you're going to do with the kick drum. You generally know what you're going to do with the clap. They are rhythms that are set in stone. Every genre has certain things that are set in stone, and in the progressive house genre, you have things like the kick and the clap that are kind of set in stone. So don't spend too much time on things like the kick and the clap in the beginning while you are still creating something. Spend most of your time on melodies, bass line, chords, things like that. Okay, the creative things. Okay, so let's get into it. Okay, so what I want to do next is I want to just add the kick drum to the loop. The kick drum is going to give me a foundation for the actual loop. What the kick drum is going to help do is solidify the rhythm of the actual loop. I know there's rhythm in the chords and I know there's rhythm in the bass line, but what that kick drum is going to help to do is just solidify that rhythm, because now what's going to happen is the kick drum is actually going to play on the 1, 2, 3 and 4 where a click track would, for example, play. And what that's going to do is it's going to just glue all the different parts that I have so far together so that they just work nicely as a group. Okay, so the kick drum is pretty standard. It plays on the 1, 2, 3, 4. It's gonna go quickly, so let's get into it. So what I want to do now is I want to just add a new layer to the actual chords that we have so far. So what I'll do is just take a piano sound and I'm going to just copy the MIDI over to the piano sound, and then we're going to play that MIDI on that piano sound. So layering is all about actually taking multiple different sounds and playing the same MIDI on those sounds so that they create a new hybrid type of a sound. So you can create your own custom sounds that are quite interesting to listen to by adding layers to one sound. Okay, so you might have 3, 4, 5 different sounds that are all playing the same thing, and they all sound like one thing in the actual song, but actually in your project it's 3, 4, 5 separate things, okay, because each layer is adding to the overall sound. So I'm going to just add a piano layer to the actual chords just to add something extra to the sound of the chords. So let's get into it. Okay, so I'm going to continue with layering, but this time I'm going to add a layer on a synthesizer, and the goal is I want to make a sound on a synthesizer, and I will add that custom sound that I've created as a separate layer for the chords as well. Okay, so this is just more chord layering, and like I said, now this time I'm going to actually create a sound from scratch. By the way, I would suggest that you get yourself one good synthesizer plugin and then just learn that synthesizer plugin, spend time with it, read the manual, watch videos on it, create sounds in it, and just try to get a handle on how the synthesizer works. There's many different good synthesizer plugins out there, so just find one that appeals to you and start learning it and just spend time with it. I don't suggest to new producers that they should get every synth plugin that's available on the market, because generally what that does is it creates information overload. And usually if we are new to something and there's a lot of information coming at us in a short amount of time, we end up quitting because we feel like there's too much for us to process. We don't feel confident that we have the ability to process all this information, and the hill seems too steep for us. And so I would suggest just kind of getting your feet wet with one synthesizer at a time, and the way to do that would be to just get one good synthesizer and just spend time with it. Okay, so that's just something to keep in mind. So let's get into it. Okay, so it's time to do some general work. One of the important things that you need to be aware of is saving your sessions. Okay, I've lost a lot of projects when I started because I didn't save. So up until this point I haven't saved anything in this session, so it is time for us to save, because now we feel like we actually have something that we want to use, that we want to actually work on. So I would say in the first 20 minutes or so after you've started, I would say just go ahead and save the actual session. You can always delete what you don't like, but if you don't save it and something happens to your system and it just crashes, then you can't easily get back what you've lost. Okay, so I would suggest that you save often. Also, just learn the shortcut for saving. It's pretty standard. Usually it's Control S on a Windows system, usually it's Command S on a Mac system, and just learn the shortcut and just get used to actually using that shortcut just to update your work as you go along. Just save. Okay, anyways, enough about saving, let's get into it. Okay, so I want to add another melody, and this melody is going to be built around a 2-bar loop, and the idea is you're going to set up a loop in your DAW that will just last for 2 bars. So you know that the loop for your chord progression is 8 bars long, but now what you're going to do is you're actually going to set a loop for 2 bars, and you're just going to have that loop playing the whole time. And what you will do then is on a new sound, you're going to actually program in a new melody that is 2 bars long. And then what you'll do is you'll actually duplicate those 2 bars over and over and over to fill up your 8-bar loop. And then generally what I would suggest you do as well is at the end of your 8-bar loop, that last 2-bar loop, I would suggest that you just create something different there, just to add some variation, just to give the listener a hint that the loop is ending and that something new is about to start. Okay, so you're gonna see me do that now, so let's get into it. Okay, so I want to add a layer to the bass line. So I'm just going to go look for some sounds. And then as always, I'm going to copy the MIDI of the actual bass line over to the new sound and then try to make it all work together. Okay, so check it out and see how we do that. Okay, so we are at the end of lesson 1. I hope you learned a lot from this. I hope you are following along. Please, as I said, you need to open up your own DAW and create something, as I am busy creating in these lessons as well, so that you can actually learn while I am doing it. I am showing you how it's done, but you need to actually practice how it's done for yourself. So don't just watch the videos, watch it, pause it, go and do something, come back, rewind, play it again, pause it, go and do something. That's how you're going to get the most value from this course, by actually following along and doing something, because you are going to learn when you do it yourself. You're not going to learn when you are watching someone else do it, okay? Just remember that the brain stores different things in different places, okay? You might know what you should be doing, but when you actually do it, the brain stores it in a different place, okay? So the actual knowledge of what you should do and the actual practical skill of doing it, those are two separate things, okay? So don't stop at just watching the videos. Please go ahead and open up your own DAW and actually follow along and do something yourself and create a song for yourself. I hope you learned a lot from this video. Another thing that I would suggest that you do is get out a notepad, and as you are watching these videos, as these little tips pop up in the text boxes, go ahead and write those things down so that you can actually refer back to them when you are producing later. The idea is that you actually want to internalize those things so that you just know them in your head. But as you are learning, I would suggest that you write them down and go through them on a regular basis and treat it like homework, treat it like classwork, okay? Read through it after you have actually done the lesson. You want to go back to what you've written down and you want to read through it and make sure you understand. And then you actually want to go and apply these things practically so that you can get the skill set down and not just the knowledge base. Okay, for now I'm going to stop this video. Please go ahead and like the video and also subscribe to the channel. I really do appreciate it. Thank you for watching. I will talk to you in the next one.